Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our town hall discussion on accessibility within fraternities and sororities for those with disabilities. My name is Mike Ayalon. I am the CEO of Greek University. We have three outstanding expert panelists who are joining us today live, and I want to give you a brief overview of their experience to frame up our conversation that we're going to have today. First, we'll start with Gail Echemendy. She is a social worker who works with students with disabilities in higher education to attain the skills needed to succeed both academically and socially. Gail knows the importance of being fully engaged both academically and socially in college. Research shows that full engagement on all levels increases positive outcomes both in the short term and the long term. Gail has supported inclusionary practices across the higher education platform and actively educates individuals and groups on the benefits of including those with disabilities in all aspects of college life. Gail's experience as a person on the autism spectrum with learning disabilities has been imperative in creating programming and outreach for students and organizations who are interested in bridging the gap between neurotypical and neurodiverse populations. Gail is a Windmill certified diversity trainer and often talks to groups about the importance and benefits of diverse and well-rounded groups in creating forward-thinking teams that promote the most innovative solutions to accessibility, understanding, and acceptance within social, education, and employment systems. Next is Sarah Farnsworth. Sarah's life changed dramatically after a rock climbing accident in 2001 at the age of 16. Her teenage and young adult years centered around therapy appointments, rehabilitation, and chronic pain. Her determination to fully recover and walk again required hours of effort daily. Within 2 years, Sarah went from being paralyzed from the chest down to utilizing a wheelchair, to using 2 forearm crutches, then 1, then 2 hiking sticks, and then just 1 for balance. Sarah did not let her physical disability stop her from living an active and fulfilling life. She married and was blessed with 4 children. However, after a decade of marriage, they divorced. Then Sarah put herself through school to obtain her degree in psychology. While finishing school, she worked as a substitute teacher, specializing in the special education department, CTT, and started a modeling career at the age of 32. But mobility continued to be a problem, as many of the schools in which she worked were not well adapted to her needs. Large campuses and the need to change rooms quickly were obstacles that she needed to remove if she was to be successful. She offers consulting, coaching, mentoring, and inspirational speaking using individual and group formats to aid those with disabilities to find ways to become more independent, as well as to promote hope for healing, balanced wellness, and a passion of life for everyone. Finally, Nicole Morris, she is the Director of Community Initiatives for United Way, where she is invested in fostering and developing intellectual awareness, social responsibility, integrity, and providing members of their community with unique opportunities for leadership and engagement. Prior to that, Nicole worked in student leadership and student involvement while working on the development and growth of the fraternities and sororities on campus at various universities, including St. Joseph's University, SUNY Oswego, and University of Bridgeport, where she received her master's degree in counseling and college student personnel. Nicole, of course, is a very proud member of Delta Gamma from UConn. So wonderful. Thank you all to all of our panelists, and thank you all to all of our people here who are joining us live to discuss this very important topic. And we were talking about, before we started informally, just about how important this topic is, but it just doesn't get the airtime that it really deserves, because ultimately, there could be so many incredible members of our fraternities and sororities on college campuses, but we currently have systems that might prevent these potential new members from participating in these events. And so that's really what we want to talk about, because I feel like we're missing out on people who are really creative with problem solving, and they have a new way of looking at all of the things that we do within fraternity and sorority life. I believe that it's our job to look at the academic, physical, and social environment within Greek life and honestly evaluate how welcoming these spaces really are for those with disabilities. So, let's think about some of these different situations. Let's assume that we have a man or a woman who signed up for recruitment and they are confined to a wheelchair. What do you think is the most practical way to address this particular situation? And I guess, let's start with Sarah on this one.
All right. Hi. I would be happy to discuss this. Thank you so much. I just want to say I'm honored and thrilled to be participating in this. So, how does this present as an issue in fraternities and sororities? This is super relevant to my life experience because it was, that's what I went through. And how can we make it more welcoming for people in that situation? I know for me, when I was going through the process of transitioning from high school to college and university level, it was really, I guess in the way, to put it easily, it was a hard transition in the way of learning how to advocate for yourself and what your needs are. What would have helped me to feel, I guess, more welcomed was knowing that I would be able to get access into a building if it had ramps, wheelchair ramps that were available, if they had big enough bathrooms to use in the house or wherever. My experience was that I didn't really feel like I had those needs met. And so it did make it feel less welcoming and I didn't participate. How can we make it better? Bringing more awareness, and exactly what we're doing right now. Sharing it with more people, bringing light onto a subject that where if you don't either have the experience or you don't know somebody who has experience in your life, you really just don't realize that these are issues because they're not part of your life. They're not part of your experience. So it's not like there's anything bad or wrong with what has happened or happening. It just needs more awareness and change. And for people to speak up and say, hey, hello, I can do a lot with and for and in contribution. I just need to have accessibility. I would love to participate. I really honestly would have loved to participate in some things, but it just wasn't available. So that's where we're at. We're making these changes. That's why it's so exciting. Do you feel like that was good for the question?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I know Nicole had some thoughts on that as well. Nicole, what do you think about that? Let's assume we have a man or a woman who signed up for recruitment at one of the various universities that you've worked at in the past. They're confined to a wheelchair. How do we address the situation?
I think a lot of the times on college campuses where fraternities and sororities are allowed to utilize recruitment space is restricted. It's really hard as an advisor to get into the most sought after rooms, which are usually the most accessible and the spaces that accessibility is considered. So often you're in a really far off ballroom and the easiest way from point A to point B is a set of stairs and the elevators are very, very far away. And I think even marketing through each of your materials, making sure it says, if you need accommodations, please call, and making sure that you have a good relationship with your disability services office. Being someone who frequented that office in college, they were surprised that I was a member of a sorority. They were surprised that I was in that community and seeking services. And that always kind of shocked me, considering how many of my sisters came to me with similar issues to what I had and what I was going through, but they weren't advocating for themselves. I think that, I have multiple sclerosis. So sometimes I need physical help, getting up and downstairs, mobility help. Sometimes I don't. I also was a victim of sexual assault in college and had severe PTSD, which triggered anxiety. So being in crowds, being bumped into by people, loud noises where I couldn't tell what was happening behind me were things that really stirred feelings of dread and kind of shut down all of my ability to cope, ability to talk and be coherent, because my body was fighting this flight or fight response. And going in as an advisor, I had both of these perspectives, and Something I created for my students who had emotional and social needs was a Zen zone. And something I created for my students that had physical needs was making sure that every single one of our elevators was clearly marked, that we had signage going to all of our elevators, that we had chairs that we could pull out while they were waiting in line, so that if you needed a chair to sit while you were waiting and lining up, you could have that. There was extra chairs in every single room, and all of my presidents were let to know who would need a chair, and we knocked on the door and said 3 chairs will be needed for this round for participants going through recruitment who were more comfortable sitting than standing for long periods of time, and that was just normalized. We brought in disability services to talk about physical and emotional disabilities during the recruitment counselor training process for both my men and my women. Our IFC went through it as well. And when I worked with students who in multicultural recruitment, which is much different, I always ask the question, how is this accessible? Do you know, how is this accessible? And I think that comes back to us to know that that might not be the first thing that our students are thinking about when they're planning these events. So it's on us to advocate and just ask that simple question, is how is this accessible? And if it isn't accessible, is there an alternative? And hopefully with the Zoom boom, people can incorporate more digital technology into their recruitment events, letting people who wouldn't feel comfortable in a space, or it's a hard to access space, like they could still see the presentation or be in an alternative space with some members of a group that is more accessible to 3, 4, or 5 potential new members.
I love that. I think you're right. I think with this big boom in Zoom usage, I think this gives us new opportunities for students with disabilities to be able to participate. So I think this is kind of one of those hidden gems. This, you know, a really good positive thing that has occurred is that now it's more accessible online. And I love that piece about adding that to, let's say, a recruitment flyer or something like that. If you need accommodations, send an email here, call this number, and that allows, it announces to the university community that this is an event that's open to everybody. I really, really like that a lot. I also think
simple
about
tagging it, that's for, this event is for me too.
Right.
I'm not excluded.
Right. I love it.
I find also marketing accessibility on your materials is incredibly important, because that's how people know they're welcome when they have a disability. So it says, you know, you can say something like, we value accessibility, please contact us with any needs that you have, or we put on there disability friendly, you know, even sometimes I've seen marketing materials that have different websites or associations that people can go to find out what kind of things that they could get as far as accommodations in an environment like that. So I think that Nicole, you brought up a really good point. That marketing material has to be inclusive. It has to tell people you are welcome here. And so, because that's the first thing they see, right? You know, and then putting a team together of people who can address accessibility issues. I mean, people with disabilities are great out of the box thinkers, right? So putting that team together and saying, where are our accessibility issues? How can we address these accessibility issues? What are our options? So that when people do start coming to you and they have disabilities, you already at least have a team in place and some basic understanding of what the accessibility issues are before they even come to you and say, hey, this is what I need.
Great points, Gail.
Can I add to it?
Please do, Sarah. Yeah.
As a student, I would say having that option where it's a private number or email or someone you can go directly, where it's more intimate, for lack of a better word, and you don't feel so uncomfortable or like, I gotta go make a big deal about things. I don't want to I walk around all the time and draw attention to me always. I don't want to draw more attention. So that is fantastic, I think, from a student perspective, where it just makes it more comfortable and easy to get the needs you need And then you can go and show up and feel like you are participating without it being a big deal. So brilliant. I think it's a great idea, Nicole and Gail.
Yeah. Now, Sarah, I mean, one of the things that I think about as we're getting into recruitment, I know it's going to look a little bit different, certainly today with coronavirus, but it seems like distance and walking from house to house in recruitment settings can be, I think, a little bit excessive. So should we be looking into a van service for members of our community who have these mobility impairments?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something that is for everyone. That if you had a wheelchair or a scooter or something, can I get into it? Can I participate? Is it something I could drive? You know, these are all relevant things. Maybe the issue of why they're not happening is there's not a funding for these things. And maybe that's an easy fix somewhere in the university level or fraternity and sorority platform. But yeah, it definitely presents when it's going about that way, you're not welcome. You're not invited. That's kind of how it feels. I can't do it. I would love to, but I can't. I want to, but it makes it too hard. And I don't have the help and resources and support I need. That's what it feels like. That might not be what the intention is, but there's just not the awareness there. That's what we're like trying to change. Like everybody is welcome. Everybody has good ideas. Like take your disabilities and realize that.
To Nicole, you know, what can we, when we announce programming at our fraternity and sorority house or another location, what can we do to ensure program access? I know you talked about listing somebody specifically on the event invite. You talked about internal.
Well, he froze, but so as I was saying, it's like, I think that having different levels of different types of events is really important. I know that, especially with my anxiety, I wasn't going out to a lot of the mixers that people were throwing. I didn't feel like that was my place. Things that were late at night, no. I just didn't want to be there. So for me, the sisterhood events that were apple picking and stuff like that were more approachable. But they also, you know, there was 10 of us who did a book club. There was a group of us of 15 that watched Glee every night that it was on. And those were just calendar events, and I could get credit for attending those really small events and not feel like I wasn't a good member because I wasn't participating in the big events. Things like the homecoming parade, I couldn't do them. It was too many people, too many loud noises, and it triggered too much anxiety in me to feel comfortable. And I wasn't the best version of myself. But if you put me in a room with 5 people to craft the night away, that was where I really shone, and I could build my relationships that way. Same with physical disabilities, having different access points and making sure that, okay, one of these is an athletic type of event, one is an artistic type of event. I know Greek Week is really, really unapproachable to a lot of students, not just for ability status, but also for people feeling like, I'm not athletic, this wasn't meant for me, my body type isn't meant here, my weight status isn't meant for this type of event. And when I looked and started advising, I made sure that for every athletic event, there was an artistic event or a intellectual event like Quizzo or trivia, or something that was equally as competitive that could gain your team points. That did not rely on someone's physical ability, because I didn't think it was fair, because at the time I was suffering and I really was having trouble walking up and down the stairs of my, to my office. And, goodness forbid that we had any other students that felt that way and didn't want to come forward and didn't want to make an accommodations for themselves. They just don't come. But if you give access and think about a variety of programs, is every program meant for every single buddy? No. Based on interest? No. Based on whether they're going to like the program? No. But it is our job to make sure that there is a variety of different interests, and we're not just pigeonholing ourselves into one type of event. You see a lot of fraternities do recruitment, and it's every single event is an athletic event. Well, well, we're doing golf, then soccer, then flag football, and then we're watching the game. Well, you're going to recruit one type of person that way, and that one type of person is going to perpetuate an idea of what your fraternity is like. So diversifying those events is really important. And with diversifying events means you have to hold events in different spaces, because you're not going to go to the football field to hold a card game or a trivia night. It's just changing up access levels. Universities are hard, especially historic universities. The buildings just aren't made for the type of access that we're requesting now. People with disabilities probably weren't the students that they were serving when some of those buildings were built. And we can't change that in every scenario, knowing that guidelines have changed so much since the 1800s when some of these buildings were built. And our campuses are built on hills, they're built on valleys, they're built where golf carts can't go, they're built where parking lots are very far away from our programmatic space. And every one of those is difficult and challenging, but that just means that variety is even more important when we're talking about recruitment, when we're talking about a year-long calendar, when we're talking about having visitors, when we talk about attracting an alum to come to our events. I've had so many alums say, I can't come because that's just too many stairs in that building. Like, I'm not gonna go to that ceremony anymore. It's too hard to get there. It's too hot, there's no air conditioning. By diversifying our types of an alum events and attracting them, they'll come back because as people age, their needs are different and their ability statuses are different and their mobility statuses are different. So I think variety is really what we have to focus on here, and making sure that we push our students outside of their comfort zone in regards to variety and still keep it fun. Why can't watching a game be as good as having a card game or an Uno tournament or a Mario Kart racing tournament? They're both athletically in competition minded, but they both attract different ability statuses.
Yeah, so smart. I mean, if we want to recruit a diverse chapter and we believe that a diverse chapter is going to help us with problem solving and other things as a student organization, then we better have diverse events. And so you're absolutely right. I don't see enough of diversity of events. When I look at the calendars of fraternities and sororities, I see a lot of the same type of events, and you're going to get the same type of people if you have the same event 7 days in a row. So, so I think we need to start thinking about that, and I'm happy that you brought that up. I'm curious from Sarah's perspective, many of the older fraternity and sorority houses that we have, they're not ADA compliant because of the age of the buildings, going back to what Nicole was talking about. So Sarah, do you think that we should be thinking about alternative locations and or somehow investing money in order to make these houses compliant?
Absolutely. It all ties in so well together. I just want to echo what Nicole said. It is something that happened, long ago with the housing situation being built so long ago, and it probably didn't cater to students with needs. Or maybe we just didn't realize and see it. We weren't as aware that long ago as we are now. And now we realize, like, oh, there is this population and they are able to contribute. So now let's become equal and diversify and incorporate. So yes, absolutely. Either that's kind of tricky with older buildings because some of them are historical, and by law, I believe you can't change certain things. So perhaps building or having a building that is accessible, something different, something separate, but just makes it welcoming, that you are part of it. We're just meeting at this location. That's maybe one option. Maybe that's not the best. It might still have that exclusivity aspect. Any other suggestions on this one as far as that goes? But yes, it is definitely something, when it's not available, you don't feel welcome.
Right. All right.
Detachable ramps are a great option, and Habitat for Humanity is pretty much across the United States of America, and they do have a ramp program where if you contact them, they will partner with you to get ramps on buildings and homes. So especially if your fraternity and sorority houses are off campus or in a community, you should always have that, because it's not just for the person who has a disability always, it's for the person who might have a, you know, broken ankle, rolled ankle, broken leg, ACL injury. All of those are temporary disabilities as well. And that ramp that can be moved and stored to go from one place to another, put in the back of a car to be transported, is a lifesaver in those instances as well. So I highly recommend to everyone who has housing to consider finding and fundraising for a ramp for the house if they don't already have one that's usable and detachable.
Yeah.
So I would
To that. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, I think one of the things I'd like to really drive home here is that diversity breeds innovation. And so for each of the sororities and fraternities, that diversity is going to help them to innovate in ways that are specific to their campus, specific to their organization. And so putting together a team that really looks at and discusses these things, I think is imperative, because you can't know, you know, some of these colleges are online, some of these colleges are new, some of these colleges are really old. So the needs are going to be different according to how you're going to college. And so putting together these diverse groups of people is imperative in understanding what your needs are at your particular college and in your particular organization.
Yeah. Well, I just want to echo a little bit, like the accessibility equipment, such as a ramp, those are brilliant ideas. And to suggest a fundraiser to do it is a great idea as well. It would also be super great if that was just funding available. Or it was just there already. So you didn't have to do something extra. Because that's kind of like, from this perspective, it's like, well, now I have to go and ask people for more help and more money because I have needs that are just normal for me. It's kind of uncomfortable still. Yet people will do it. It's a good experience. I think it helps the able-bodied world be more inclusive to the disabled world, and that's a good experience. But it could be better. It could just be there. It could be something that we don't have to ask for extra just because we have different needs. Along that line, it's not just ramps, it's not just stairs, it's bathrooms, it's bedrooms, it's kitchens, it's so many things that people just have no clue about unless they are disabled or have other learning disabilities or anxiety, emotional, all of these things that you're not aware of, which I just want to echo Gail's idea of building a team and how crucial that is, and what that might look like, and how do we help make these changes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. I also want to talk about people with social disabilities. So I'm wondering, how can we help potential new members in fraternities and sororities who have social disabilities? I'm thinking about people who have anxiety, people who have, are on the spectrum, people with ADHD, people with communication disorders. How can we help these potential new members, Gail?
So this is an interesting question because we've been talking about mobility issues, which tend to be very obvious, right? So those people with invisible disabilities, me included, it's interesting because we try to hide it. We are ashamed to ask, and because we can hide it, we do. And so making things accessible for people who have social, emotional disabilities can be a little trickier. And once again, I'll go back to the team. I think it's important to have a team, but I also think it's important to market on your literature that you are disability friendly, invisible and visible disabilities. So a lot of this comes down to communication as well. We know that people with social and emotional disabilities sometimes have a very difficult time with communication. So having a point person who's a good communicator, who has a lot of charisma and is a very open and accepting, non-judgmental person, to meet these people where they're at and to say, hey, what can I do to help you? Do you need a buddy? Do you want somebody to give you a tour? Do you need a setup here? Do you need to know what you're walking into? So I know for me, as a person who has autism, for me, I need to know what I'm walking into. That's a really uncomfortable situation when I don't know anybody. Get a lot of anxiety over that. So having a point person who is there for you, that you can ask questions to, that can kind of set it up for you, I think is a really important thing. But once again, I'm going to go back to, we have to let people know that they're welcome. This is a big thing. I would never have pledged a sorority because I didn't know if I was welcome. I didn't know if people would think I was weird, or they wouldn't be able to handle some of my little glitchy things. Like, I'm a very black and white person, so sometimes somebody will make a joke and I'll go, really? You know, and then for whatever reason, like, people are confused, like, why didn't she get that, you know? So I didn't feel welcome at all, you know? I felt weird. I felt like an outcast. I felt that sense of not being perfect enough. And Nicole, you brought up a really good point about people who have other things, like maybe they're heavier, or maybe those types of things that we think about, but we don't necessarily assign as a disability necessarily, right? Just because somebody is on the heavier side, I'm on the heavier side, does not necessarily mean they don't have something to contribute, right? Hey, I am a great trivia person. Like, you want me on your team, like, no lie, like, I am so good at that. But maybe somebody's looking at me from the perspective of, she's not a good communicator. Like, how do I prompt her to communicate in this setting? And that requires a one-on-one. Now, that's not true for everybody. Nicole talked about anxiety. Sometimes anxiety can be your worst enemy. And I know this because as a person on the spectrum, I also suffer from anxiety. And so knowing how to handle somebody who's having that anxiety, maybe they need a break, maybe they need a slow introduction into things where they find some allies before they go into a big event, you know, things of that nature. It's a very, and it's very specific to your population. So you have to really have those people who are willing to look at those aspects, who maybe you have on your team who have these issues and are saying, this would be good for our organization. This would be good for our campus. This is a really important thing. It has to be an individualized look at disability where you're at.
And when
Thank
we
you so
talk about
much.
the new member process, one of the most utilized tools is that new member handbook. We can go through and name what those books are called in almost every single organization. I don't know of a single, and someone can correct me, but I don't know of a single one that offers that in an audio version. And there are so many students that are ADHD, ADD, dyslexic, and imagine just opening that up for our students to be able to multitask, be on a run and listening to what is going to go over. We ask that our new members memorize and know certain facts about our organization. That's part of becoming a member, is knowing what you're joining and taking some pride in knowing that. And I think we make it really hard because it's a one version fits all. I know we've moved a lot online to webinars, but it still requires someone to be focused for a longer period of time. So then it's mixed audio and visual, which is great. But it's still, it can be better. It can be so much better. I know a lot of us have song clouds where the students can listen to what the song should sound like that they're learning, and that's great. But imagine if we put so much more materials into audio versions. that could be translated. It's one of the reasons I'm so proud to be a Delta Gamma, is because our philanthropy is service for sight and aid for the blind. So I know it's something that they consider in everything they do. Is this able to be translated to Braille for our members and people that support us that are non-visual readers? And is this in an audio version for them as well? And I think that's something that more organizations should be cognizant of, for not just visually impaired people, but for people with ADHD, dyslexia, ADD, and other disabilities.
Yeah, love Delta Gamma. Let's do more good. I love it. So let's.
I just
Go ahead.
wanted to address one thing that Nicole said. So accessibility for people who have either a visual impairment or a hearing impairment. So I know that the Greek systems in the colleges have access to their disability support services. And oftentimes you can go to that office and ask them, hey, how can I make this accessible to these particular students? And many times they have resources that they can give you, often for free, to help you do these things. So for instance, captioning a video, or creating an audiobook, or creating something in Braille, or things like that. So I just want to emphasize, because I work in disability support services, that many times, and you'll find great people, because they don't go into disability support services unless they're passionate about it, for the most part. They will do what they can, and they have a lot of resources, even if they're not directly involved resources at the college. They know places to go to get those resources. So definitely have, once you put those teams, those diverse teams together to kind of figure out how to have accessibility inside your organization, go to your disability resource center, get them involved with what you're doing, have them help you with resources, because that's what they're there for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gail, and Nicole kind of brought something up that I think is interesting. A lot of the fraternity and sorority new member education programs have these new member manuals where there is a lot of memorization and things like that. So how do we accommodate a learning disability in a program like that?
So that's really interesting. So of course we know learning disabilities cover a huge spectrum, and that can be from needing extra processing time, to maybe they're not a good reader, to maybe they're more of an audio learner. Maybe they need to be active, they're kinesthetic, so they need to be active while they're reading or listening to something. So that's a really interesting question, Mike. So really, I think that's the formats. You need to be able to offer universally different formats of these types of things, and allow your students or your members to have the time that they need. And you might even ask them, say, do you need extra time? Should I give this to you early? You know, things like that. Because I know a lot of times sororities and fraternities have a kind of like a timeline of stuff that they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of foundational. It builds one thing on top of another. So knowing that this particular member needs a little bit extra processing time, for instance. So you might go to them and say, hey, would it be helpful for you if, you know, I gave this to you early so that, you know, you could kind of, you know, process this and figure this out, you know, just knowing those things and not making it a big deal. Like, just like, you know, hey, you just might need a little bit more time, you know, like it needs to be, I hate the word casual because it makes it sound like it's not important, but it needs to be, I don't want to feel like I'm going to the doctor when I ask for some sort of accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to just be, hey, this is Gail, and this is, you know, Joe Smith, and Joe's like, hey, do you think you need this early? And I'm like, well, yeah, maybe that might be helpful. You know, like not a clinical interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Where a lot of times people will address a person with a disability in a very clinical way. And I just want to be a person just like everybody else. I don't want everybody to be trying to become an expert at disability, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just want them to ask me, hey, you know, would this be helpful for you? And if not, is there something else I can do?
hmm Now, Gail, there's a lot of administrators on this call here that might be planning some large scale events or, big media pushes. What can be done in terms of sign language interpreters, caption media for videos, or maybe assistive listening devices? What can be done in those areas?
Your DSS at your college, go to them. They have these resources, and many times they are free. I know for us, we have, and we're a small school, we have 2 full-time interpreters with DSS, whether it's for an event or it, is for class or whatever. We have 2 full-time interpreters. We also try, if we have students that have visual impairments, we always try to match them with somebody who can be like just describe things to them, right? So that they know what's going on, whether it's a video or whether it's an event or something like that. So we try to pair them with another student who maybe has some interest in visual impairments, and so we use a lot of peer-to-peer, which I think is really important because peer-to-peer is going to change the culture. So that peer-to-peer support is really awesome, and I've watched it work so well in so many ways. But your first line of defense is always your DSS because they have the tools. They know what's available. They know what's out there. So, and if they don't have it immediately, they know where to go and they can tell you where to go to get those things. So captioning videos was a really big issue at WNC. We had, oh my gosh, especially with everything with coronavirus and going to the virtual platform, we had to really get on the ball with captioning services. We have a very robust deaf studies program at Western Nevada College. That was quite the undertaking. And in 3 months, we managed to caption 90% of the videos that instructors were using and about 70% of the videos that administrators were using. It was quite the feat. So, and that's going from figuring out who can do the captioning, how accessible the captioning was to our staff, how expensive it was. It was quite the thing. So I understand there's a learning curve too for those people who are not disabled, trying to figure out how to navigate the resources that are out there. DSS, go to them because they are the people that can help you to do that.
Very, very good. Thank you so
I
much.
know some of the people on our call are on national offices and executive offices that don't have access to those. And, or if you work in a small office and are trying to think what is the easiest way to kind of bridge that gap. Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter have built-in navigation shortcuts, screen readers, and closed captions built into their platform. Instagram does not. Instagram does not. If you think that Instagram is a platform most of your students are interacting with you on, which is most likely true, you cannot forget about those other platforms because your students with disabilities who need closed captions or nav shortcuts or are using a screen reader, they're not on Instagram because it's harder for them. Transcribing your videos, closed captioning, things like YouTube have functions for that. IG has, Instagram has no captioning features, and it already has to be put into your video and burned into the bottom for it to show up on Instagram. And also, it's really, really important. A lot of us use like the animation. If you're using anything like animations, you have to have descriptive audio or audio description. They use both terms. And the best way I've ever been able to describe that is with The Wizard of Oz. They use a lot of first names like Glinda and Toto. If no one was describing what those two people or things were, you would never know that Glinda was a witch that looked like a bubblegum and that Toto was a terrier, because they don't describe those people or those characters in the movie. So having descriptive text, especially if you're using graphics, is great. And alternative script, you'll see, especially if you're on an iPhone, on Instagram, it'll ask you to say, what is your alternative text? If you don't know what alternative text is, you might have a caption that says like, this is the sisterhood you want to be at. That might describe the picture great to someone who can see the picture, but what if you can't see the picture and your alternative text is describing what is in that picture? Again, Delta Gamma does a really amazing job. If you go to their executive offices Instagram page, you can see some amazing examples of how easy that is to incorporate into your flow of work. And my amazing friend Raina is actually on our call who helps do that. But I learned a lot just from reading their descriptions and saying, hey, that's easy. I could do that. And if that's the first step I take, the first step I take. You also want to make sure you have contrast and color choices when you're doing these marketing materials. That a lot of us have color schemes, that you're not using a baby blue and a medium blue, because if you're using screen readers or any type of assistive technology, it doesn't pick up on those not very contrasted colors. You don't want to embed text into your image because it pulls out really fuzzy and screen readers can't pull out that text. You want to make sure your links are really short and easy to understand. So if you have a long link, shorten it through Google, use a bit like the bit ones, there can be bit-ly, use a service that can shorten it so someone who's using audio can hear that and go to that website that you're directing them to, and it's not a jumble of words and letters. Make sure you're always putting contact information for someone who is confused, if that's the only thing they can pull out of the audio description. And like I said, you need to use more than one platform, especially if you're in office and higher education. I was definitely a culprit of this. I would use Instagram heavily because that's the only thing my students were really on. And when I learned about how Instagram just doesn't compare to other platforms for their closed captioning and audio technology, I started changing that. So I really encourage you to cross promote all of your programming and offerings.
Very good. Thank you so much for all of that. Very helpful. Hey, Sarah, generally speaking, what would the policies be for service animals in places such as fraternity or sorority houses to assist a student with a disability? Because I've seen all kinds of stories over the years about, different types of animals and what the rest of the chapter thinks about that. So what should those policies be, Sarah?
I'm really glad that came up. I have a service dog myself, and I've definitely encountered some awkward and uncomfortable situations using him and just not taking him because it's not understood. What are the laws and all that. Yes, they need to be allowed. Bottom line, yeah, you cannot deny that. There is a difference, however, between a service animal and an emotional support animal. And that, I think, is super crucial for the college, university, fraternity, or sorority to know and understand that there are differences. The difference, in a nutshell, service animals can literally go anywhere. Restaurants, colleges, everywhere. They are allowed to go. End of story. And an emotional support is not allowed to go everywhere. So that is the difference. However, with the way, I guess maybe they're HIPAA laws, you do need to go about it in a tactful way of differentiating, I guess, or at least knowing if it is a service animal versus an emotional support animal. And what there are certain questions that you are and are not allowed to ask. And I also believe that it is the student's responsibility to inform the college or university or just the fraternity itself that this is my service animal. These are the appropriate documentations I do have, which you do need. And this is how they help me. And I may or may not bring them. And I do need accessibility and understanding for that and not be given a hard time. So that, yeah.
And
Thank you.
Sarah, great point. I actually have 2 emotional support animals.
Oh, okay.
So I have 2, both Lenny and Sadie, and they are both rescue animals. And I lived on a college campus with just one at the time. And I got a lot of questions about the legitimacy of having an emotional support animal. And I always said a service animal will save somebody's life. It is necessary for them to navigate in the world. It alerts people. It is an absolute tool that makes living like a possibility.
Yeah, more
and
functional.
navigating a possibility.
Mhm.
My emotional support animal helps me feel comfortable in a space that I might have felt uncomfortable in, but it is not necessary for my survival in that space and will not alert anybody if like a seizure is coming on.
Mhm.
But I do think it's really important, and people have said, why don't you get a vest for your dog? He's not a service dog. I never want anyone to think he is a service dog. You can pet my dog. He is there to cuddle. And I think educating on the differences is really important as we come up to a climate where more and more students are having service animals and emotional support animals on campus. If I see a dog that has a vest, it's different than one that says ESA or what that lingo is. And I think professionals, both on campus and in our national offices, should have materials put into their recruitment guidelines, into their new member processes and their housing processes about what is appropriate for in dealing with those types of things, because you always come across students who also have allergies and other medical conditions that cross interfere when you bring in animals. And it's also very important to consider, just like what you put out to eat at any gathering. It's important to consider our gluten-free individuals as well. But if you have someone with a service animal and you're planning outdoors events, making sure that there's water available that a dog can drink, it's a whole nother layer of consideration. But I do think the differences are really, really important. And I always advocate for my friends and colleagues with service animals, because it's just so vital and so misunderstood. So Sarah and I could probably talk about that for ages.
Yeah.
Probably.
So,
There's a good
so
question here.
I also have an emotional support animal as well. So it's interesting because so we started our 3-week introduction to college course this last Monday. And of course, this is the first time we've used a virtual classroom. On Monday, I met 11 dogs, 5 cats, 2 chinchillas, and 10 goats. And it sounds crazy, but these students, and we never, and here's the caveat. As a person who works for DSS, we never even thought about these students, how much discomfort it might cause them to be in a classroom without their animal. Their animal is that thing that connects them, that grounds them, that helps them to focus. So it was really interesting that every single student in this class has animals, every single one of them. When you have a disability, there's a certain sense that people won't accept that about you, that you need that comfort, or in the case of a service animal, you need it to live, somebody who can open a door for you or pick something up off the floor, or whatever, alert you to a red light so you don't walk in the middle of the street with traffic going. But emotional support animals are just as important as service animals, and I think that is been up for a lot of debate, especially in the media.
Mm-hmm.
Airlines are saying, you can't bring service animal or emotional support animals on a plane and things like that. Now, Nicole brings up a good point. Some people have allergies, some people have fears, and I think a lot of that is education and making adjustments and pivoting when you need to, and so taking that on an individual basis is really super important. So, yeah. I think that you made some really good points, Nicole.
Corbin in our comments said that he works in Res Life and they're not allowed to ask, is your animal service or ESA, but they are allowed to ask, are they performed to train a task? My always go-to is, I loved when people said, now how do you use Lenny? And that was his name. And my door sign on my door had both of our names. My students thought I was married for a really long time until they found out my husband had 4 feet. It's important, and I think it's an easy question to ask, like, oh, how do you use your animal? Or like, it's the same, what function does it have, or like what service does that provide? But it gives such a great opening for your student to say, oh, he actually alerts me for when my blood sugar is low, or oh, my dog lets me know when I'm about to have a seizure. Or in my case, like, I was super upfront about it. I'd be like, Lenny's just my comfort animal. He snuggles me and makes me feel safe and sound at night so I can actually sleep. And that's what he was there for. But having someone who's just going to take the time to ask you and feel like they're genuinely getting to know you is such an amazing thing. So I know that technically there are barriers, but there are ways where you can ask and open that door if a student is comfortable letting you know how their service animal functions for them. And it's really important if you're working in Res Life, if you're working in housing, or you're with a student for a prolonged period of time at a leadership institute and they have an animal, that you kind of do understand how that animal is functioning for them and with them, so that you can, as an educator, be able to direct other students not to touch their service dog, or help them advocate for themselves, know that it, barking means something and it's not just the pestering of the animal, or what those signs might be. And if your student is able to talk to you about that, a great opening is, oh, what's your dog do? Tell me more about what he does for you or what she does for you.
Excellent. Excellent points. So I'd like to wrap up with this question, and this is really for everybody on our panel. Acceptance seems to be a very big issue. So how can we increase disability awareness on our campuses so the students in general have a better understanding? What do you think about that, Gail?
So a couple of things. One, your literature, whatever your marketing materials are. We are disability friendly. Do you need accommodations? Here's a phone number or a website that you can go to. I think that's the first line of defense right there, is making sure that people understand that they're welcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second thing is, a lot of times organizations take on philanthropic causes, especially social justice causes. Get involved in the disability community. Find out how you can impact things like legislation and different types of stuff that's happening on your campus. Like for Sarah, that might be ramps or bathrooms or something like that. For somebody with social anxiety, it might be, as Nicole said, a Zen room, which I think is a great idea, by the way, Nicole. I'm totally using that. And so, I think it's important to make sure that the literature reflects that these things are already available, right? So it's universally available. You don't have to disclose your disability to use these things, right? And you can say, hey, I'm going to the Zen room, and everybody goes, oh, okay. Like, nobody's like, are you okay? What's wrong with you? What do you need? Can I help you? Like, and causes you to panic because suddenly you've now caused them to be anxious, right? So I think acceptance is a cultural change. And I think by utilizing some of these universal things, we start to change the culture from, I see your disability and that's the only thing I see, to I see you have a lot of strengths and we have some universal supports, so use what you need.
Love it. Sarah, give us some final thoughts. What do you think we can do to increase disability awareness on college campuses?
Having it become just the norm for everyone. It's when you look at the statistics of disabilities, whether they're physical or not, intellectual or emotional, it's like 50% of the population is disabled. That's a lot of people. So that's a lot of people that need these resources that are probably not advocating for themselves because of all the things we've discussed. And by what we're doing right now and projects going forward, it just changes the culture. I just want to echo again what's been already said, just changing the culture. Starting way before college. That's not our topic right now, but it's definitely something that ought to or could be a better change if we implement these things in elementary school. And it's just the norm. People are different, and that's okay. We all have different abilities and different strengths. What are they? What do you need to be successful? It's not, you know, the kid with ADHD in the classroom isn't, you know, the problem kid anymore. He just has different needs. And look at how amazing and smart and creative and adaptable and blah, we could go on and on, right? About I've got my own kid that is that kid, you know, and so I see it, I live it, I have my own needs. My big desire is to help change that culture in the beginning, where it starts. I mean, we could even go as far as pre-K, you know, it's like that, the beginning years, and then it just coming through the process of middle school, high school, and college, universities, into the work field. And that's not our topic either, but that's also a big issue is, you know, advocating for yourself in the workspace and getting the needs you need. And all of this is relevant. So bringing more awareness, making it normal, making disabilities normal, because a lot of people have them. And just learning how to advocate for yourself when you need to, and feeling comfortable doing it. And that just goes back to everybody contributing to help change the culture and bring it into more normalcy. I think that would help a lot.
Love it. Thank you so much, Sarah. Nicole, give us some closing thoughts. What can we do to increase disability awareness on our college campuses?
I personally, this is the forefront of my mind every time I say I'm going to an event, a conference, a meeting, a phone call. Is this accessible? What's my anxiety level? What can I do? If it's the first thing on my mind, I don't want it to be the last thing on the person who's planning its mind. I don't want to feel like an afterthought. And I feel like that's so important, is to just check and say, who's the afterthought in this conversation? And a lot of the times it is your minority students, your students with disabilities, your students with language impairment. But the other thing that I want to stress is that when we're talking about students with disabilities, like I said before, it's not always a permanent disability. You have students that need these services for temporary reasons. I didn't have anxiety until I went through a very traumatic situation in college and had PTSD that flooded me and changed my life. And that was very hard adaptation. People get into accidents. People lose their sight because of a genetic component that doesn't hit until later in life. Your college years are so transformative, and your students will start to access things completely differently than they ever have. And we need to put access at the front of our minds, because with the technology that they have on their phones, they're accessing everything differently. And we need to be inventive about how they can access us, what we're offering, and our lifelong friendships. We say it's lifelong, and that life includes a lot of ups and downs, twists and turns, accidents, recoveries, cancer diagnoses. It covers so much. And if we're going to be that lifelong sisterhood or that lifelong brotherhood, we better start putting the worst moments of people's lives on the forefront of ours, because that's truly what's going to change the trajectory. And someone will leave an organization so quickly because they're not supported in the worst moments of their life. And I am lucky enough, and I will say it every single time, that when I went through what I did, I had one advisor who said, and I was ready, I had my pen, I was ready to leave, said, that's not what sisterhood is about, and brought me in and helped me go early alum status and helped me navigate with my disability and helped me get involved in a completely different fashion than what was normal for a sister my age. And it changed my life. There is no such thing as normal in anyone's life, because normal means different for every single person. So we have to be flexible. We have to learn that lifelong means embracing people at really, really bad times and finding a way to reach out to them and bring them back in and make them feel at home again.
Wow, beautifully said. Thank you so much. I know everybody who's listening here, whether they're in live or they're listening to this as a recording, they're all going to want to connect with you offline. I'm just telling you right now. So Gail, you know, if somebody has a question for you, is there an easy way to follow you or to get in touch with you if they have additional questions, Gail?
Yes. So I can be reached. In fact, how do I get an email out, Mike?
Just tell us your email.
Okay, so it's GAYLEETCHAMENDY Okay, so if anybody has any questions, I would also encourage people at this point to, yes, Nicole.
Yes,
Thank
Nicole,
you.
it's on top of it as always.
Thank you. Thank you. I would also encourage people to look into some different resources. So if anybody is interested, I have a ton of those that I can email out to you, and you can kind of take a look at those resources. And once again, encourage you guys to create these teams, these diverse teams that really help to really lead the conversation in an innovative way for your particular group. And so I just wanted to end with that, because I just think it's really important that out of the box thinking is imperative. No one person has all the answers. No one person can think of everything. You need a group of people to really look and see who's being left out, you know, who's the afterthought, as Nicole says, right? It's really, really important. So thank you, Nicole, for saying that, because that I think is a very common feeling across the board for people with disabilities, is that they're the afterthought.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Sarah, what's the best place for our listeners to follow you or contact you online in case they have questions, or maybe they want you to come and speak to their students?
Yeah, I'll put my info right here as well for everyone. But I have a super easy website, saralyncoach.com, and Instagram, same thing, Saralyn Coach on Instagram. Same as Facebook. So I'm on all the social media platforms and all that, and LinkedIn as well, just with my name, Sarah Farnsworth. But there it is right there in the comments. People want the direct links to it. But yeah, my website is probably the easiest way to schedule things with me and get a hold of me that way.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. And Nicole, what about you? If people have questions or they want to follow you online, where should they go?
It's just Nicole Rose Morris at gmail.com, and Cole_Morris. So just take the Nicole, take the NI off. I am on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all the social medias. And you can follow me. And if you can't remember any of that, I like every single one of Greek University's posts. So you will be sure to find me in their likes. And you can follow me if you follow Greek University.
Perfect. That's awesome, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate that. She's always been such a huge fan of Greek University. And so I'm so thankful for Nicole and her friendship, because it means more to me than you know. So thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. You're all wonderful, great resources, and a fantastic discussion. I hope this is shared widely, because we really need to bring attention to this. It shouldn't be an afterthought. I want this to be the main course. I really, really do. So please help me to do that by sharing this, by liking this, and sending this to other people that really should be considering some of these things when they're putting together events this fall for our students on our college campuses. So thank you all so much for participating, and we hope to see you on another discussion sometime soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Thank you,
Have a
you.
good weekend.